Okay, ready.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay, round 2, Peter. Welcome back.
Yeah. We're here.
First round was a few technical difficulties, but
Yeah.
we're back. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay, so this episode is episode 24, and we are doing The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, I think is how you pronounce his name. Last time you didn't actually say if you think I got it right or not. What do you think? How did I do?
I think you did well. Yeah.
So yeah, I'll give the usual book summary and then we can dig into it. Okay, so The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho is a story about an Andalusian shepherd boy named Santiago. It follows his mystical journey from being a shepherd with a dream to traveling the world and encountering many people along the way, from bakers to thieves, gypsies to alchemists. It's a story about following your dreams and allowing your heart to guide you as you pursue an unknown treasure in a foreign land. Only through that journey can you find the treasure that has been with you the entire time. So yeah, that's the kind of high-level overview of the book. I don't know if you have any additional things to add there. I'll add a few sort of definitions and stuff before we jump deep into the actual book itself. But before we kick off, do you have anything from your side, Peter?
Not really, but I think the one thing just want to mention is just how, it says in the beginning of the book, and I mean, we're probably going to touch on it when you're looking at the forward, is just how, the book wasn't a success when it was initially written, but then now it's like one of the most sold books, as well as one of the books that has been translated into many languages. So yeah, I want to say I think the original book was written in Portuguese, I think, if not Spanish.
Yes, yeah, I think it was Portuguese, but let's
Yeah,
go with Spanish, a Spanish dialect of Portuguese. No, I'm joking. I have no idea, but I think it was Portuguese.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add. But yeah, you can dig in.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'll just define a few sort of things that come up from time to time in the book, and then hopefully it'll be helpful. I'll also add the caveat sort of right at the beginning that the book is, it's like a very, well, maybe even before we get into it, is that there's going to be spoilers. So you can cut the podcast now if you're wanting to read the book. It's a normal story. It's not like the usual kind of stuff that we do on the podcast that is like self-help type of books. It does have those elements to it, but it's much more of a usual story narrative. So it might be one of the ones someone wants to read before they listen to the podcast. And then the other sort of caveat is that it is quite like a mystical story. So if you find that weird, then that is all right. We accept that you might find it weird, but it is a very good story and an interesting story, even though, like, for example, in my case, and I think yours the same, Peter, that as Christians, not all the stuff that is said we understand in the same way. For example, like one of the things that is kind of a common theme in the book is that belief of pantheism, so the belief that everything is connected. I mean, yeah, everything is connected and that everything is God. Whereas, for example, Christians are monotheistic religion, and all kinds of little caveats like that. But those kind of things aside, it's a very, very interesting book. And then some other potentially helpful things for when reading the book is Andalusian. So Andalusian is, if someone is an Andalusian shepherd boy in this example, then it's someone who's native to or lives in Andalusia, which is a region in southern Spain. So that's all that means. Maybe it's a fancy. When I heard it, I was like, "What on earth?" But that's all that it means. And then also throughout the book, often Santiago is just called the boy. So yeah, we actually kind of just in the beginning here, he's called Santiago, and then for the rest of the time, he's pretty much just called the boy. And then lastly is the idea of omens. So generally an omen would be kind of this sign or event that's predicting the future. And the word omen comes up a lot in the book. And the way that I understand it is basically that it's just almost you can understand it as a sign from the universe that's guiding Santiago towards his sort of personal dream goal thing. And yeah, hence the different like mystical, spiritual type of ideas. But yeah, that term comes up a lot, and it is helpful to know about it. Cool. Should we dig into the preface then, or the foreword?
Yeah. The foreword. Yeah.
Okay, so the page first letter of the Roman numeral system. It starts with, "The Alchemist wasn't working. My original publisher decided to cut me loose. But I never lost faith in the book or ever wavered in my vision. Why? Because it was me in there, all of me, my heart, my soul. I was living my own metaphor. A man sets out on a journey, dreaming of a beautiful or magical place in pursuit of some unknown treasure that was with him the entire time." And he carries on to say, "As I wrote in The Alchemist, when you want something, the whole universe conspires to help you." And then a page or two later, he says, "My heart and soul are your heart and soul. I am Santiago, the shepherd boy, in search of my treasure, just as you are Santiago in search of your treasure." And then this last part I really like. He says, "When I read about the clashes around the world, political clashes, economic clashes, cultural clashes, I am reminded that it is within our power to build a bridge to be crossed. Even if my neighbor doesn't understand my religion or understand my politics, he can understand my story. If he can understand my story, then he is never too far from me." And sort of tying into what we mentioned earlier, like part of the reason why I really like it is because even though, as mentioned, that this book is much more on the mystical side, and although it's an interesting read, I don't necessarily like relate directly to, coming from a different worldview, I don't relate directly to it. But what I can relate to very much is the story of this person trying to pursue things in the world and encountering obstacles and overcoming those obstacles and meeting different people along the way. And that's a very human story. And that's why Paulo says, "It's your story, it's my story." Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean the different life lessons to it. Yeah, like you said, like it's very different to the books we've read in the past, but there's still some underlying factors that are very much similar to the books that we've read. It's not in the same category, but it's like, I mean, in the beginning it writes that it's a book that appeals to different individuals differently. It also ties in with your own worldviews. So yeah, it's a book that I think anyone can learn something from it. And more so in relation to where they're at and just what their worldviews are.
yeah, there's lots of different things that are encountered throughout the book that we can take lessons from. Yeah, so then I suppose we can start digging into the story. So we're going to follow a similar structure to what we usually follow, where I'm going to read a few snippets and then we're going to piece it together and discuss it and then move on to the next few snippets and so on. Hopefully the sort of flow works out. But the way that we're going to break it down is there's kind of sort of small stories, sub-stories within the broader story of this shepherd boy pursuing his dreams. And the first story is in part one, what we've kind of grouped together as the girl and becoming a shepherd. So he encounters this girl and he also becomes a shepherd. So I'm going to read a few snippets and then we'll chat a bit. Okay, so starting on page 3, it says, the boy's name was Santiago. Dusk was falling as the boy arrived with his herd at an abandoned church. The roof had fallen in long ago, and an enormous sycamore had grown on the spot where the sacristy had once stood. I can never remember what that is. But basically, the story starts out with the boy, Santiago, at this large sycamore tree. And we'll find out sort of right towards the end of the story how this is meaningful and relevant. So then jumping on to the next page 4, we see it says, sometimes he would comment to them on things that he had seen in the villages as they passed. But for the past few days, he had spoken to them only about one thing, the girl, the daughter of the merchant. So that's that idea of him meeting this girl, and it's this merchant's daughter, and he kind of can't get her out of his head. And then the next page says he recognized that he was feeling something that he had never experienced before, the desire to live in one place forever, with the girl with the raven red hair. His days would never be the same again. And then carrying on to page 8, he had attended a seminary until he was 16. His parents had wanted him to become a priest, and thereby a source of pride for a simple farm family. A little bit further down, one afternoon, on a visit to his family, he had summoned up the courage to tell his father that he didn't want to become a priest, and that he wanted to travel instead. And so that's sort of how he ends up becoming the shepherd. He decides, no, he would rather travel than become a priest, and learn things from the world and so on. And then on page 10 it says he had to prepare himself for meeting with the girl, so he's on this journey and he discusses this with his parents, and then he wants to go and travel back to meet up with this girl and sort of I guess get to know her and possibly start a relationship with her. And then all of a sudden, and this is page 11, he had suddenly remembered that in Tafara there was an old woman who interpreted dreams. And so this is how that chapter ends, or that, I guess, section rather than chapter. And then we're going to see just now after we chat through it that it's going to go into a section where we find out what this recurring dream is that he wants to be interpreted by this woman who interprets dreams. And then he meets the old woman, and he meets another old man who turns out to be a king, and all kinds of interesting things. But yeah, I don't know, Peter, if you have any initial comments on the starting out as the girl and becoming a shepherd and all of those initial parts.
Yeah, no, so for me, what I need to add, and just something to lay out, is that it shows how life takes different turns. And I mean, the listeners will understand why later, but at that point, the boy's dream, or what he desired, was to go back to the town where he met the daughter of a rich merchant that was interested in him reading, and go back there to as you said, asked to be in a relation with her, but then comes the aspect of the dream that he had been having, which then changes the whole course of his life.
Yeah.
Again, we'll come to find out why. And I mean, even in that, on page 10, there's something which I highlighted, which it says at the bottom of page 10, it's a possibility of having a dream come true that makes life interesting, So I think him wanting more from, or him trying to understand the dream is something that he's pursuing for his life to have a
Yeah.
little bit more meaning. And again, we'll understand a little bit why or how that dream was important, and also like it just shows how when we pursue our dreams, life takes different turns, and the story
Mm.
is about the different, you know, I don't want to call them roadblocks, but different points in
Yeah.
the boy's life that he came to almost seemingly giving up on his dream,
Yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting in this case that it was an actual dream that he had. Most of us, when you say we have a dream, it's not that we've dreamt it while you're asleep. It's just kind of relaying what our desires are and concluding that that's what our dream is. So,
Yeah. That's true. Okay, so then let's find out about the interesting dream. So yeah, we're gonna run through another few little snippets. So on page 12, it says here, "I've had the same dream twice," he said, and he dreamed that. Well, actually, I'm not going to read because it's a fairly large little chunk of the book. But basically, we found out that he's got this dream and he's explaining it to this old woman, and the dream is about him him ending up by the Egyptian pyramids, and he sort of doesn't know why. Like, what's the meaning behind the dream? What is it? What does it mean he should do? Like, how does he understand this dream? And he's kind of perplexed at that. And then on page 14, the old woman says, "And this is my interpretation. You must go to the pyramids." And then he, of course, says, "I didn't need to waste my time for this. And then she says, "I told you that your dream was a difficult one. The simple things in life are the most extraordinary. Only wise men are able to understand them. And since I am not wise, I had to learn other arts, such as the reading of palms." And then a little bit later, he says, or it says, he started to read a book that he had bought. And then, or actually, maybe just a little bit of, before we jump forward there, I find that part interesting with the old lady, because it's something where we often try to seek the complicated like meaning instead of just the surface level. This is actually how it is. And I think last time in the attempt that we had for the podcast, we spoke a little bit about how we sometimes run into these things in life where the difficulty isn't in understanding the meaning of something, it's just acting. For example, in terms of like developing software, or so, we both software developers, and sometimes we actually do understand the solution, and we almost want to pretend, not in like a strange way. We just want to be like, maybe we need to figure out something more, or learn some new tool, or do something else before we can solve the problem. But quite often, especially once you've gained enough experience, you understand how to solve the problem. It's just that you have to now go and solve it, and it's kind of difficult at the time to figure out how do you solve little bits of the problem. But you actually know all the answers. You just need to spend time just doing implementing the solution. And it's similar with this, where it's like he needs to, or like going to Egypt or the pyramids is the interpretation of the dream. But he's like, how could it be that that's the interpretation of the dream? Like, it can't be that straightforward.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I just want to add to that is it's just, yeah, just to echo what you said. Yeah, in our line of work, when presented with a problem, our initial solutions will usually be the easiest, but just because of how we're wired, we think it can be, then we spend so much time trying to over-engineer the solution and actually make things worse instead of solving the problem when, your first initial thought when you heard of the problem was actually right. And yeah, like you put it with this dream, like he went to someone thinking that he would tell him a little bit more to what the dream is than he actually knows. Because I think what he
Yeah.
was upset with was more the lady told him exactly what he's pretty much she told him the dream that listen, your dream is straightforward, but in someone in that position, if they're seeking counsel to have their dream interpreted, they're expecting a little bit more, than what they received. The interpretation needs to be, very, and I mean, I'm sure that's everyone's sort of quest when they go ask or seek counsel from someone else when they have a problem. They probably have thought of solutions to it, but they go to someone thinking like, oh, they'll tell me something different. And like, when then the person they seek advice from tells them exactly what they think,
Yeah.
I'm sure it's received with a bit of, they're a little despondent when they hear it at first, but it's just the actual fact that, again,
Yeah.
going back, you overcomplicating something that doesn't need to, it is as it is, and you just have to trust that that's the case,
Yeah. Yeah, it like it says, it's the simple things in life that are the most extraordinary. And it's I just going back to the software idea of it, I used to often, and I tend to do it less now as I've grown and hopefully become slightly wiser, even though I still have a lot to learn. But I used to think very often that there must be some additional secret that people at like Microsoft and Google and those kind of companies have. Like their code surely can't look like mine, just normal code, But the more and more sort of I learn about things and stuff, you sort of realize like, oh, okay, actually it really is just normal code. There's some programmers that write better code than other programmers, and that's fine and stuff like that. And obviously at companies like Google and Facebook and Microsoft, etc., they sort of try and filter out for people that do a really good job. And so the coding standards might be higher on average, for example, but it's not that there's some other magical ingredient. It's still at the end of the day just normal code that you or I could write, and it runs on normal computers. And yeah, there's lots of other like fancy big things that get put in place, but foundationally, it's pretty much the same thing that every other software developer does, just at another company that happens to be called Google. And it's to me, at least, it was an extremely difficult thing to grasp that and be like, oh, it's actually just code. But yeah.
I mean, essentially, it's a language, and I mean, everyone speaks the same language, depending on which part of I mean, not any, but I mean, if you speak English, it's the same English in many parts of the world, and
Yeah, if it's C#
like,
or Java, etc.,
yeah,
it's just
the
C#
same in
or
writing
Java.
software. Yeah, and I mean, you understand it in that way. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, then sort of carrying on with the same section on page 15, it says here he started to read a book that he had bought. This is now Santiago again. And then as he reads on, an old man sat down at his side and tried to strike up conversation. And then later we found out that this man is actually the king of Salem, and he's a person named Melchizedek, and it's kind of a sort of wise old man mystical figure that Santiago initially is kind of like, just go away, I want to read my book. And then over time, we found out a little bit more. So I'll carry on reading. He says here on page 19, the old man says, "Give me 1/10 of your sheep, and I will tell you how to find the hidden treasure." And then Santiago kind of thinks to himself that the old woman hadn't charged him anything, but the old man was maybe like her husband or something like that, and trying to get treasure out of her. I mean, get money out of him. And just as a side note, the woman we learn earlier in the book that the woman, the gypsy who interpreted his dreams, she said to him, "I'll interpret your dreams if you give me 1/10 of the treasure that you find." And now this old man is asking for 1/10 of the sheep. So that's like an upfront payment. Rather than once he finds the treasure giving 10%, the old man is wanting the 10th of his sheep, which he's like, but I haven't even got the treasure yet. This is kind of what Santiago is thinking. And then the boy sort of says, but before you could say, or it says here, but before you could say anything, the old man leaned over and picked up a stick and began to write in the sand of the plaza. There in the sand of the plaza of the small city, the boy read the names of his father and his mother, and the name of the cemetery he had attended. He read the name of the merchant's daughter, which he hadn't even known, and he read things that he had never told anyone. And so we kind of find out that this old man, King Melchizedek person, is actually, he's some sort of a mystical figure that basically is almost there to guide people towards their dreams and help them. And then carrying on page 23, it says here, if you want to learn about your treasure, you will have to give me 1/10 of your flock, said the king. But what about 1/10 of my treasure, said the boy. And then the old man looked disappointed. If you start out by promising what you don't have yet, you will lose the desire to work towards getting it. And then carrying on to page 26. Here I am between my flock and my treasure, the boy thought. He had to choose between something he had become accustomed to and something that he wanted to have. Then on the next page, there was nothing to hold him back except himself. The sheep, the merchant's daughter, and the fields of Andalusia were only steps along the way to his destiny. The next day, the boy met the old man at noon, and he brought 6 sheep with him. And then a bit further down, where's my treasure? He asked. So now he's asking the old man who said he would help him. And then the old man replies, it's in Egypt, near the pyramids. And then the boy was startled. The old woman had said the same thing, but she hadn't charged him anything. And then a little bit later, it says, take these, the old man said. They are called Urim and Thummim. The black signifies yes and the white no. When you're unable to read the omens, they will help you to do so. And then it says, but if you can, try to make your own decisions. The treasure is at the pyramids. You already knew that. But I had to insist on the payment of 6 sheep because I helped you to make your decision. And then, yeah. So I really like the way that the story frames the making of a decision, because often we want to be in the situation where we like, I will give you a piece of the treasure when I find it, rather than putting in the upfront investment and saying, I'm in some weird loose way, I'm willing to almost bet on myself and give it a go. And the other sort of pro to doing that, to doing the upfront investment, is kind of like we see in the book. If you, let me just actually reread it. Where the point where it says the old man was disappointed. He says, if you start out by promising what you don't have yet, you'll lose the desire to work towards getting it. And I think that's a really helpful way of a helpful thing to realize. If you put that investment up front and you say, I'm willing to bet and try and figure out how to get there, then you have an incentive to get there. But if you just like, I'll figure it out later, or I'll get there when I get there, or let's share the reward when we get there. It's not always the worst decision. For example, if you want to start a business and you say, okay, let's do 50-50 and like let's work as a team, like that can work and so on. But if you are not willing to invest anything, I think you should take a step back and say, like, is it
worth doing?
Is it worth doing? But also, like, is it a wise decision? If you really think it's a good idea to do something, but you're not willing to invest anything in it, and it doesn't have to just be money. It can be often it is money, but it can be time or effort or whatever it might be, so. From your side, Peter.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think what that also stood out for me to be like, the payment after something is usually like it's not motivating. I know I'm using that term that loosely, but it's like if you know you're going to have to give away a portion of something even before you start, I think that is a little like, man, I'll work 100%, but at the end of it, I'll just come out with 90. What's the point?
Yeah.
And I mean, but, strangely enough, it's 90% you didn't have, but still, the human nature still kind of gravitates to always getting 100%, but that's just how life is wired. And like you've said, another thing to note is that one way to make a decision if you really want to do something, if it's you willing to invest in it, as the word goes. So I think in the end, and again, maybe what the gypsies said was encouraging enough, but I think he still wasn't convinced that the treasure was there because she was like, I'll get my payment after. It was still like, I think, and I mean, I'll say it as myself. If someone was to tell me something, I'd be like, if you're sick in cancer in that sense, and they're like, no, I'll get my payment afterwards. It's one or two things, Either you're not confident that it will happen because they're like, man, I'm not losing anything in any way, or you're super, super confident that this would definitely happen, But at the same time, I don't think it instills the motivation that's needed. But once you've paid for something, you want to prove a point. I mean, for instance, I can say, I know this is a wild example, but if the gym was to say, no, come to the gym up until you get your body goals, then you pay. I don't think most people will pay. But if you pay a gym membership, you've paid your gym membership. You're like, I've paid for this. I need to use.
Yeah, no, it's a good.
I need to go to the gym.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think. I mean, like I was actually talking with Jamie about this earlier today. Ironically, is that if you, for example, pay for a trainer, half of that cost is, to me, worthwhile paying just to have like an accountability thing. Like I paid for this. I need to go. I can't just let this money fly away. It's there's obviously a lot of other things that personal trainers can help with. Like they can help you with form and to give you an exercise plan and all those kind of things. But a massive thing that's super valuable is just surely the fact that like there's someone there that you gave money towards, and it's like why would I let that go to waste? So yeah. No, I think the gym example that you mentioned is it's a good one. I think relatable for many.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the next section?
Yeah.
The journey to Tangier. So, just a quick aside. Tangier is a place that if you picture Spain, so Spain is, if you have the continent of Africa, then Spain is just a little bit above it, and it's across the ocean. So if he's currently in Spain, he's now going to take a trip to Tangier, which is a little hop over the ocean, and it's like a coastal city, apparently, and then you go from from Tangier, which is it's like almost all the way on the left-hand side of Africa, and then you kind of have to go all the way to the right-hand side to get to the pyramids. So he's kind of going to start his journey now, and what we're going to find is that he thinks he's a far way into his journey, but actually it's only just the beginning. Because if you've crossed the ocean, you're like, oh, I've made a big stride. But yeah. Okay, so I'm going to jump through some sections again. So starting on page 33. The sale of sheep had left him with enough money in his pouch, and the boy knew that in money there was magic. Whoever has money is never really alone. Then, it's a little bit of a strange statement, but carrying on. 34. He meets this guy in this bar basically, and this guy says, he can get him to Africa. Get him to Egypt. And so this is sort of where the story picks up again. You have to cross.
I just wanted to make a note that I think you missed a part of. I know you're covering it now, but explicitly saying that he had then sold his ships and after he had given the 6 away, and then actually embarked on the journey across to Africa. And in that as well, sorry, I interrupted.
No, go for it. I think it's a helpful interruption.
Yeah, in that as well, going back to what I said earlier, that also shows you how people's lives can take different turns. Because if you remember, the boy wanted to go back to the town where he once saw the beautiful maiden daughter that was interested in him reading, and that was like his entire goal to actually go back there. But now he's faced with this crossroad. He had to think about it, but he's been told, like, okay, you need to go to the pyramids to get your treasure. Then now he's had to forgo that dream or that desire to embark on the dream of finding treasure, and then, he then crosses over to Africa, and then he's now in this town, and as you explaining that he finds himself at a bar, and then he meets this man that's telling him that he can get him across to the pyramids. Sam.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that, because I think my jumping around skipped that, which is quite a helpful caveat. So now he finds himself in Tangier, and he's chatting to this guy, and the guy says, you have to cross the entire Sahara Desert, said the young man. And to do that, you need money, and I need to know whether you have enough money. And then it carries on to say on the next page, we could get to the pyramids by tomorrow, said the man taking the money. But I have to buy 2 camels first. And so now this guy's got all of Santiago's money. And then it carries on to say, the boy never took his eye off his new friend. After all, he had all his money. He thought about asking him to give it back, but he decided that that would be unfriendly. Then on to the next page. Suddenly, there in the midst of all the confusion, there was the most beautiful sword he had ever seen. So now he's there in this area where this guy said he needs to go and buy these camels, and they go to this, I guess, like a market, and there's all these people, and then he sees this beautiful sword. And then it says he realizes that he had been distracted for a few moments looking at the sword. All around him was the market, people coming and going, shouting and buying. The boy wanted to believe that he had simply become separated from his new friend by accident. And then on the next page, but now as the sun began to set, he was in a different country, a stranger in a strange land, where he couldn't even speak the language. He was no longer a shepherd. He had nothing, not even the money to return and start everything over. All this happened between sunrise and sunset, the boy thought. And then further down, when I had my sheep, I was happy. I made those around me happy. People saw me coming and they welcomed me, he thought. But now I'm sad and alone. I'm going to become bitter and distrustful of people because of one person betraying me. I'm going to hate those who have found their treasure because I never found mine. And then on page 40, he realized that he had to choose between thinking of himself as a poor victim of a thief or as an adventurer on a quest of his treasure, for his treasure. And then he says, I'm an adventurer looking for treasure, he said to himself. And yeah, so I think we see all of the twists and the turns of trusting someone and sort of thinking you're on your way, and then all of a sudden this person takes it all from you. But then in the midst of all of that, even though one might have these sort of fears and concerns, and I really like that sort of small caveat of just because this one person did this one thing to me, now I might become distrustful of all people. And some people actually end up going down that route, and it's very sad. But it's understandable to some degree. But instead, we see Santiago saying, in spite of this difficult situation, I'm going to choose to rather take this other route, rather than just being seen as a victim of this thing that happened to me. I'm going to rather choose that I'm an adventurer. I'm going to still look for my treasure. So, yeah. Thoughts from
Yeah, I
yourself,
mean, on the trusting part, just going back, I mean, there was an incident that happened in the bar where, in the midst of him speaking to the stranger that robs him, the bartender was shouting, but because he didn't understand the language, he didn't understand what was happening. But I believe that in that moment, the bartender was trying to, tell him that, he doesn't need to further interact with this man. But I think the man was a proper opportunist and charmed his way through because he could speak a language that the boy understands. But again, I think for me, there was also a pivotal point in the story that takes place here because he then, instead of saying, I have nothing, let me give up on this quest to go across the desert, he then says it back to himself that, no, he's going to find his treasure, whatever the cost to be or whatever means it'll take, but he is going to find his treasure. So I think that's very important. I think even as for ourselves, that we need to understand that there will be highs and lows. We will come across what we think are mountains that we can't climb, but we have to, I think, stay true to what it is that we really want. To actually achieve our goals and to overcome these obstacles that come our way. And yeah, this story, I think that's one thing that if you read, I think different things come every time I think of this book, but this time around reading it, it's like, it shows how one doesn't get from A to Z without, having distractions along. It's not going to be smooth sailing. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean you have to veer off what it is that you set out to do. And I mean, this story is a good example of that because, I mean, as we come to find out, there's a lot that happens in the boy's life,
Yeah.
There's times where it seems like the dream is far. Like, for instance, now he's pretty much worse than he was before he even started embarking
Yeah.
on this journey because, when he set out to be, and again, the interesting thing about all this is, if you really notice, now we are like at the third part of his
Yeah, a little
third dream. If
section.
it, not third section, but third dream that the boy's on, and I'll explain why. His first was probably not what was thought of by himself, but what he was encouraged by his parents to go to seminary. But then he then decided he doesn't
Yeah.
want to be a theologist anymore, but wants to be a traveler. Luckily his father afforded him the blessings of like, I'll give you money, you can buy ships, then he became a shepherd, so that was from his desire to be a traveler. Then from there, after going to the town where he meets the merchant daughter, then that then changes because once he leaves that town, he's like, I'll make sure I travel back here to meet her. But now from that, then he starts dreaming, then encounters Gypsy and the king, and then they tell him that, oh, your dream actually means this. So if you notice, from him being a traveler to desiring to his desire for this guy, now he's like chasing this dream of his treasure. Now he's at a point where now he's lost everything and needs to
Yeah.
decide what it is he needs to do. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. And it just shows kind of the ebbs and flows of life and the different interests that a person can have over time. Yeah.
And I mean, one thing I always tell people, like, this is also a good indication of how, like, not everyone's path is the same. I think most people always feel like if they set out together with someone, that their lives would be identical, but that's not the case. Everyone will have to pretty much live out their lives as it is. Not
Yeah.
one's life is the same as any other's. They might be very similar, but you also need to face your own challenges, and your challenges won't be the same with someone else's challenges.
Yeah.
And yeah.
No, it's very true. Should we carry on to the challenge of now him having no money and then
Yes.
meeting a crystal merchant?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to read through a bunch of little snippets again. So starting on page 43, actually page 42. It says here, the crystal merchant awoke with the day and felt the same anxiety he felt every morning. He had been in the same place for 30 years, a shop at the top of the hilly street where a few customers passed. And then on the next page, the practiced eyes of the crystal merchant could see that the boy had no money to spend. Nevertheless, the merchant decided to delay his lunch for a few minutes until the boy moved on. A little bit later, it says, I can clean up those glasses on the window if you want, said the boy. The way they look now, nobody's going to buy them. And then the man looked at him without responding. The man still said nothing, and then the boy sensed that he was going to have to make a decision. Taking the jacket out of his pocket, he began to clean the glasses. In half an hour, he had cleaned all the glasses in the window, and when he was doing so, 2 customers had entered the shop and bought some crystal. When he had completed his cleaning, he asked the man for something to eat. Let's go and have some lunch, the crystal merchant said. Then on the next page, when they had eaten, the merchant turned towards the boy and said, I'd like you to work at my shop. 2 customers came in today while you were working, and that's a good omen. I can work for you for the rest of the day, the boy answered. I'll clean every piece of crystal in your shop. In return, I need some money to get to Egypt tomorrow. The merchant laughed. Even if you cleaned my entire crystal collection for the entire year, even if you earned a good living, a good commission selling every piece, you would still have to borrow money to get to Egypt. There are thousands of kilometers between here and there. There was a moment of silence. And then the merchant looked anxiously at the boy. All the joy he had seen in the morning had suddenly disappeared. I can give you the money you need to get back to your country, my son, said the crystal merchant. The boy said nothing. He got up, adjusted his clothing, picked up his pouch. I'll work for you, he said. And after another long silence, he added, I need money to buy some sheep. So yeah, this is part one ending. So all of those things that we read from the beginning almost of the podcast to now have been part one of the book, and we're going to see part two of the book. It's split into part one and part two. And in part one, we kind of see the ebbs and flows, and then it gets to this point where he's kind of just given up on his dream. And I'm saying this as if I knew all of it, but actually Peter explained it to me last time, because in the previous attempt of recording this, I was like, I don't get why there's part one and part two. So yeah. But so we get to this point with the end of part one where we kind of see he realizes like, oh, Egypt's actually extremely far away. He had thought he got to Tangier and he thought like, I've basically made it. Now I just need to get to the pyramids. And then he finds out that actually it's going to be way too far away and way too expensive. And he's like, oh man, let me rather just give up and go to earn money so that I can buy some sheep and go back to my previous life. And that's how part one ends.
Cool.
Yeah. Don't know if you... Or maybe a last comment from my side, and then I'll hand over to you, Peter. But the one part I really liked about this is, even though he gives up on his dream towards the end of this part, I really liked that he took action when he was in that dire situation. So he had no money, everything had been stolen from him. But then he had a choice to just be like, oh man, I give up, everything sucks. But he instead went to this merchant, and the merchant didn't say no, he shouldn't help out, or no, he should, or yes, he should help out, or something. The merchant kind of just was silent, and then the boy took action, and he was like, well, I'm just going to clean the glasses and see what happens. And he cleaned the glasses, and then people started coming, and then the merchant was happy, and then eventually the merchant says, oh, like, you've done a good job, like, do you want to work for me? And yeah, so I really liked that aspect of it, and I think it's a good general outlook and thing to do in that kind of a difficult situation, as tough as it can be at times. Yeah
No, just to add, like, I mean, he didn't pity himself in that moment. He was like, I think he was well aware that he needs to work, to earn money, and he got to the crystal shop and I was like, I'll do this. And I mean, it's so interesting how, I think in the text it even says, in the book it says, the man was actually going to do it anyways because he saw how the boy looked. Like, he looked like he was down and needed assistance. So he just watched him clean, because there was no interaction up until he was like, let me get you lunch. He did that in his own way. And it's so interesting to see that he was, even though he was down, he was still willing, to go an extra mile for someone that he even doesn't know, But yeah, it's, I mean, I explained quite a bit of how the boy's kind of story transitioned, has transitioned over time, and I mean, this is also another part where he's now at his lowest, but it's like, okay, how is it, or what is it I can do to sort of pick myself up, and as you've pointed it out, that's then where part one of the book ends. I think we can carry on to part two.
Cool. Yeah, so picking back up in part two, so it says here, The boy had been on page 49, sorry. The boy had been working for the crystal merchant for almost a month, and a bit further down, I'd like to build a display case for the crystal, the boy said to the merchant. We could place it outside to attract those people who pass at the bottom of the hill. I've never had one before, the merchant answered. People will pass by and bump into it, and pieces will be broken. Well, the boy said, when I took my sheep through the fields, some of them might have died if we came upon a snake. But that's the way of life with the sheep and with shepherds. And then it carries on page 52. So we find out that the old man is Muslim, and part of being a Muslim, apparently, we found out a few different things, and then the last one that's mentioned is that they are obliged to, at least once in their lives, visit the holy city of Mecca, or make a pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca. And so the story carries on here, and it says, I thought that someday I'd be rich and go to Mecca. I began to make some money, but I could never bring myself to leave someone in charge of the shop. The crystals are delicate things. At the same time, the people passing by the shop all the time are heading for Mecca. Some of them were rich pilgrims, traveling in caravans with servants and camels. But most of them making the pilgrimage were poorer than I. All who went were happy that they were happy for having done so. And then a little bit further down it says, you dream about your sheep and the pyramids, but you're different from me, because you want to realize your dreams. I just want to dream about Mecca. And then on page 57, it says, before long, the news had spread. We find out about the boy basically doing a whole bunch of little things, the display cabinet, and then another one of his ideas is, let's sell tea so that people, when they get to the top of this hill, they can now purchase this tea and they can sit and drink it in the crystal, and then maybe they like the crystal and drinking the tea out of the crystal so much that they start buying crystal. And so the boy has all these ideas, and then on page 57 it says here, before long the news spread, and many people began to climb the hill to see the shop that was doing something new in the trade that was so old. Other shops were open that served tea in crystal, but they weren't a shop at the top of the hill, and they had little business. Then on page 58, I'm leaving today, said the boy. I have enough money to buy my sheep, and you have the money that you need to go to Mecca. The old man said nothing. Will you give me your blessing? Asked the boy. You have helped me, the old man continued to prepare his tea, saying nothing. He then turned to the boy. I am proud of you, he said. You brought new feeling into my crystal shop. But you know that I am not going to go to Mecca, just as you know that you are not going to buy your sheep. Who told you that? The boy asked, startled. Maktub, said the old crystal merchant, and he gave the boy his blessing. And maktub is sort of a word for, I think, it is written, or sort of almost like it's God's will kind of an idea. And then lastly on page 61 and 62, I can always go back to being a shepherd, the boy thought. I learnt of how to care for sheep, and I haven't forgotten how that's done. But maybe I'll never have another chance to go to the pyramids in Egypt. And then on the next page, he had remembered that one of the crystal merchant's suppliers transported crystal by means of caravan that crossed the desert. He held Urim and Thummim, that's the stones, in his hands. And then because of those two stones, he was once again on the way to his treasure. And so that's how kind of that little section ties up. But essentially we see a whole bunch of interesting things here. One is, as mentioned, that the boy just keeps on trying new things and trying to figure out like what are better ways of doing things, so that he can end up earning more money to be able to buy back his sheep. And then he ends up getting some of those things right, and turns the crystal shop around from it being this place on the top of the hill, which is too far for people to get to, and so you don't really see many people going there. And he turns this disadvantage into an advantage. Now it's this crystal shop on the top of the hill that sells tea, and it's this amazing thing that you can go to and have tea at the top of the hill, and turning that disadvantage into the advantage. And then we also see this crystal merchant constantly sort of being hesitant and then giving in to saying, okay, you can do it, it's fine. And then lastly, we also see the boy looking and seeing the crystal merchant, and seeing that the crystal merchant has this dream of going to Mecca, but he never ends up actually really pursuing that dream. And the boy kind of realizes like, okay, but I might only have one chance to pursue this dream, and maybe I should actually just go for it. And then we see him realizing, okay, like or he realizes that there's this caravan going to towards the pyramids, and so he decides to take it. Yeah, I don't know, Peter, from your side, if there's any other comments.
Yeah, no. So the one thing is just I want to say is that the boy is so good at taking chances, when it comes to different things, because like you mentioned, like he goes at it when something happens, and like in this case, he sort of. I want to put it as he sort of challenged the crystal owner, because I got a sense of that the crystal owner was actually very resistant to change and was very content to where it was, because the shop was small, was doing well, and he was doing well for himself, supporting his family, as he said. But in that, again, he had a dream to go to Mecca, which he kind of just put away. And I mean, as he said, it was not as if he wasn't at that point where he didn't have the means to do it, because it was like he's seen people that he knows is richer than, even though that's very judgmental. But yeah, he's seen people that he well feels that he makes more money than going to Mecca. And he's just like, nah, I'm happy here. I don't want. And because of that whole resistance to change, he didn't want to put someone in charge. Then you further go on to be when the boy suggested a display at the bottom of the hill, he was very resistant to it and was like, no, but people will not get, the crystals will break, etc., etc. But eventually he was like, okay, let me do it. Then it then moves on to the boy's suggestion of selling tea in, crystal cups and stuff. And that alone, changed things immensely as well. And I mean, it's just kind of realizing that, and I mean, there was something a friend of mine said yesterday that, if there are just certain people that attract certain things, and for me, reading to the book, I mean, yes, it's not that believe in omen, but the boy, I kind of want to say sort of attracted a good omen, because it seems like, besides the one part where he was robbed and whatnot, but he was able to find himself in situations that propelled him towards what he wanted, and this is one of them where when he got to the point where it's like, okay, I have enough money to go get my ships, but because the crystal owner knew what his dream actually was, it was like, no, that's not what's happening. You are actually crossing the desert to the pyramids, so I find that very interesting to be for a man that didn't want to take the leap of faith himself, was actually very encouraging to someone else to do it. It's very interesting that certain people will be placed in your life just to sort of guide you, and say the right things. And I mean, as it writes, the guy said to him, "It is written that this is what you're gonna do." And I think even us as human beings, we kind of we need that constant reminder at times that, or that confirmation. Not that it's really important, but I think just sort of like a pat of the on the back to be like you're doing more and you continue doing that. You kind of feel seen, and encouraged to do what it is that you set out to do.
Yeah. No, we do. We are social creatures. Yeah. All right. So then heading over to the next part. So this is his journey, obviously, through the desert. And in this journey, he meets this Englishman and he also meets Fatima. We'll find out about her in a moment. But the Englishman that he meets at the beginning is someone who is just extremely interested in alchemy. And alchemy, kind of the main part of alchemy being turning metals into gold. And he's extremely interested in this part of, or in various aspects of alchemy and the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life and all these different things. And then it starts off like this, but I'm going to read a bunch of snippets again. It says here, it was said that he was more than 200 years old and that he had discovered the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. The Englishman had been so profoundly impressed by this story, but he would never have thought it more than just a myth had a friend of his, returning from an archaeological expedition in the desert, had not a friend of his returning from this archaeological dig, not told him about an Arab that had possessed exceptional powers. He lives at Al Faymun, or something like that, Oasis. His friend had said, and people say that he is 200 years old, and he is able to transform any metal into gold. And then page 65. He still had some doubts about the decision he had made. And this is, let me carry on reading. He still had some doubts about the decision he had made, but he was able to understand one thing. Making a decision was only the beginning of things. When someone makes a decision, he is rarely delving into a strong current that will take him places that he never dreamed of when he first made that decision. When I decided to seek out my treasure, I never imagined that I would wind up working in a crystal shop, he thought, and joining this caravan may have been my decision, but where it goes is a mystery to me. And then page 67. The Englishman says, I'm in search of that universal language, among other things. That's why I'm here. I have to find a man who knows that universal language, an alchemist. And then page 70. I've crossed these sands many times, said one of the camel drivers one night. But the desert is so huge and the horizons so distant that they make a person feel small, as if he should remain silent. The boy understood intuitively what he meant. And then further down the page. But he was excited at his intuitive understanding of what the camel driver said. Maybe he was also learning the universal language that deals with the past and the present of all peoples, hunches, as his mother used to call them. Then, page 72. The Englishman, who was unaware of all this, he was, for the most part, immersed in reading his books. The boy, too, had his book, and he had tried to read during the first few days of his journey, but he found it much more interesting to observe the caravan and listen to the wind. So we kind of have, I know it's jumping around quite a bit, but we kind of have the boy meeting this Englishman and going on this journey through the desert in the caravan, and they kind of are talking about different ideas and what are you trying to pursue and what are you trying to pursue, and it turns out that they both kind of interested in this universal language and guiding them and listening, but they are sort of approaching it in different ways. The one is sort of approaching it through books and the other, that's the Englishman. And the Englishman is kind of studying and trying to figure out how alchemy works through books, whereas the boy is kind of listening to the world and trying to figure things out through that way. And we find throughout the course of this section of the story that they kind of teach each other things, and there's not any specific right or wrong way to go about it, but there's lessons to be learned from books, but there's also lessons to be learned from observing the world. And yeah, then we find that the Englishman is also pursuing or trying to find the alchemist. And so the boy is kind of also now starts to shift towards that pursuit over time. But we see that a bit later. Yeah, any comments before I jump forward, Peter?
Yeah, no, nothing really. I think this is just the early start, and again, I'll just be like, that's now him like going back on track, after the slight setback. But
Yes, yeah.
There's nothing to add.
Cool. Okay, then jumping forward, so page 73. There are rumors of tribal wars, he told them, in the desert. The three fell silent. The boy noted that there was a sense of fear in the air, even though no one had said anything. Once again, he was experiencing the language without words, the universal language. Then on 74, once you get into the deserts, there's no going back, said the camel driver. And when you can't go back, you have to worry only about the best way of moving forward. The rest is up to Allah, including danger. And then he concluded by saying the mysterious word, maktab. Further on 75, the Englishman was fascinated with the part about the progress achieved at the crystal shop after the boy began working there. That's the principle that governs all things, he said. In alchemy, it's called the soul of the world. When you want something with all your heart, that's when you are closest to the soul of the world. It's a positive force. Then on 76, the book that most interested the boy told the famous stories of alchemists. They believed that if the metal were to be heated for many years, it would free itself into all the individual parts, and what would be left would be the soul of the world. The soul of the world allowed them to understand anything on the face of the earth, because it was the language with which all things communicated. They called the discovery the masterwork. It was part liquid, part solid. But further down, the boy learned that the liquid part of the master's work was called the elixir of life, and that it cured all illness. It also kept the alchemist from growing old. And the solid part was called the philosopher's stone. Alchemists spent years in laboratories observing the fire that purified metals. They spent so much time close to the fire that they gradually gave up the vanities of the world. They discovered that purification of all the metals had led to purification of themselves. And then on 78, why did they make things so complicated? He asked the Englishman one night. So that those who have the responsibility for understanding can understand, he said. And then he said, imagine if everyone around the world, when transforming lead into gold would lose its value. I'm going to break there. It's also another sort of somewhat strange point to pause in, but it's just sort of carrying on with the story about how they're finding out about different parts of this universal language and the different parts of alchemy and things like that. Should we go on to the next part?
Yeah, we can. I just wanted to add, I think at this point it was after then they had switched roles. I think the boy had challenged the Englishman to watch the elements, the movement of the birds and everything, and then he then ended up then reading the books on alchemy.
Yes. Yeah. I think it was around that point. Okay, so now this part starts going to Fatima, who he's going to meet, and then it also starts dealing with this tribal war that they heard rumors of and then also the meeting of the alchemist that they were kind of alluding to earlier in the book.
Oh.
Okay, so I'm going to jump through again a bunch of little pieces. So page 80. The caravan began to travel day and night. The war between the tribes had already begun. Then page 86. Maybe we'd better ask someone, the boy suggested. The Englishman didn't want to tell others about the reasons for being in the oasis. Then on the next page, did you know, or do you know someone who cures people's illnesses? The boy asked. Allah cures illnesses, the man said clearly. Then on page 88, why do you want to find that sort of a person? The Arab asked. Because my friend here has traveled for many months in order to meet with him, the boy said. So obviously his friend being the Englishman. And then a little bit further down,
I said I just want to cut at this point that arrived at the oasis as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's one. Yeah. So I think just to add context, oases were considered neutral grounds, so no one was allowed to attack them. So they were at least at harmony as compared. So as we read that there was a bit of tribal war happening around, but if you're an oasis, it was just it was neutral ground, so everyone there was kind of considered safe. And when the travelers got there, they were even asked to surrender their weapons because no one was allowed to have weapons because essentially, as I said, they were marked as areas of peace and no turmoil and stuff. And I think once they had arrived, I think they all started sharing. Or rather, the Englishman, that was his endpoint. The boy was supposed to move on, but he stuck around for a few days just to kind of hear out things about what was happening with the war. And in the process, Englishman kind of encouraged him to help him look for the alchemists. And at this point, I think they're at a well at which they're asking different people about a man, as you said, that heals people.
Yeah.
So you can.
How to like they don't want to give away that they're looking for the alchemist and things like that, but and what they're trying to achieve, but and I think that's a good point because of the fact that now we're going to see this tribal war start to play out, and essentially this should be a safe space, and it's part of the tradition that this is a safe space. Okay, so we see carrying on page 88. Finally, a young woman approached who was not dressed in black. She had a vessel on her shoulder, and her head was covered by a veil, but her face was uncovered. The boy approached her to ask about the alchemist. At that moment, it seemed to him that time stood still. The soul of the world surged within him. Then he looked into her dark eyes and saw her lips were poised between laugh and silence. He learned the most important part of the language that all the world spoke, the language that everyone on earth was capable of understanding in their heart. It was love. Then 89. What the boy felt at that moment was that he was in the presence of the only woman in his life, and that, with no need for words, she recognized the same thing. He was more certain of it than anything else in the world. And a bit further down, when two such people encounter each other and their eyes meet, the past and the future become unimportant. There's only one moment, and the incredible certainty that everything under the sun has been written by one hand only. And then page 90. What is your name? He asked. Fatima, the girl answered, averting her eyes. But further down, the next day the boy returned to the well, hoping to see the girl. To his surprise, the Englishman was the only one there, looking out at the desert. Then on the next page, as the Englishman left, Fatima arrived and filled her vessel with water. I came to tell you just one thing, the boy said. I want you to be my wife. I love you. The girl dropped her container and spilled the water. I'm going to wait for you here every day. I have crossed the desert in search of a treasure that is somewhere near the pyramids, and for me, the war seemed a curse. But now it's a blessing because it brought me to you. And then page 93. So now I fear nothing, because it was one of those omens that brought me to you. And I am part of your dream, a part of your destiny, as you call it. That's why I want you to continue towards your goal. If you have to wait until the war is over, then wait. But if you have to go before then, go in pursuit of your dream. The dunes are changing by the wind, but the desert never changes. That's the way it will be with our love for each other. Maktub, she said, if I am really a part of your dream, you will come back one day. And so, yeah, on this journey, he meets, and this is one of the pivotal points where he meets this girl, and he realizes love, which, as he puts it, sort of is part of this universal language that he's been trying to understand. And yeah,
I was gonna say,
additional.
Just as in the boy's fashion, he's again trying to chase a beautiful girl. I think that always kind of distracts him away from his so-called desire or dream. But yeah, I think what's interesting here is how encouraging she was for him not to, shift away from his dream, and kind of assure him that, I will be looking out for you to come back, because it was all like, I then become like one of the women whose husbands leave, and every day they look into the desert in hopes that their husbands will return, and yeah, I think later on when he leaves, it does point out that Fatima's life changed from that day, but yeah, like I said, it's just how interesting how she didn't encourage his thoughts of him giving up everything and actually then settling there and kind of not chase his dream anymore.
I mean, it's a really wonderful trait to have in a partner, to have someone who wants you to pursue your dreams, who doesn't hold you back from doing the things that you want to do. I think it is also there's a little bit of a counterbalance that I would put to that, to say I think it's not the wisest thing in the world to be my dream is to be away from you 24/7 and go to foreign lands while you just wait behind, and things like that. I know that that's not kind of really how the story is being portrayed and things like that, but I think it's also a helpful caveat to just be I think that's not a wise thing. I think there is some general wisdom to be had where if you actually do really like someone, you need to take them into account as well as them taking you into account, and trying to work that out together and what makes the most sense. But if your dream is to be in America and the other person's dream is to be in Australia, it's probably not a good idea to be in a relationship together. James' life advice. Okay, so going to page 100. So I'm going to read another, just a bunch of little snippets. I want to see the chieftains. So he's now had this vision, or I don't know if it was a vision, I can't actually remember, but he's had this sort of realization dream kind of a thing about a potential attack. So we said that there's the safe space, though, the Oasis area, but he's realized, or he's had this sort of dream that there's going to be this attack. And now he wants to go and tell the chieftains that. So it says
okay, but before you move on, I just wanted to say that's also, that also, I know you just kind of rushed over it, but it's, I think, important to also let the listeners know that that's when the boy was actually starting to realize that if you really pay attention, you can listen to different things of the earth. Pretty much, things will reveal themselves to you, essentially. And one of which, I think, in their conversation was then him seeing horsemen, but not in a friendly manner, attacking the Oasis. And as you've pointed out, it was, and I mean, I said it earlier, it was a neutral ground where people or violence wasn't supposed to take place. And I think he spoke to one of the camel drivers about it and kind of said, either, you take this to your grave or you say something about it, and maybe, you still take it to the grave, but at that point, maybe some action will be taken from it. And then, yeah, like I said, he then asked to see the chipstand, and then, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so then I'm going to read through the rest of the pieces. So, page 100, I want to see the chieftains. I've brought some omens from the desert. Then jumping to page 102. 2,000 years ago in a distant land, a man who believed in dreams was thrown into a dungeon and sold as a slave. The old man said. Now, in a dialect the boy understood. Our merchants brought that man and brought him to Egypt. When the Pharaoh dreamed of cows, they were thin, and the cows were fat. This man I'm speaking of rescued Egypt from a famine. His name was Joseph. He too was a stranger of the land, like you, and he was probably about your age. So this is the chieftains now explaining that there was this guy Joseph. It's actually the biblical story of Joseph, who was cast out as a slave, and he actually turned out to interpret this dream and save the Egypt from famine. And then page 103. Tomorrow we are going to break the agreement that says no one at the oasis may carry arms. Throughout the entire day we will be on the lookout for our enemies. So they take this dream seriously, basically, and they say this. And then when the sun sets, the men will at once surrender their arms to me. For every 10 men dead among our enemies, you will receive a piece of gold. But arms cannot be drawn unless they also go into battle. Arms are capricious as the desert, and if they are not used, the next time they might not function. And so he says, if at least one of them hasn't been used by the end of the day, tomorrow one will be used on you. And obviously this was a frightening thing, because they're saying this oasis thing is supposed to be a safe space, but we're going to trust your dream. But if your dream doesn't come true, then the sword will be turned on you, or the weapon will be turned on you. And then page 104, suddenly you heard a thundering sound. When the blinding dust had settled a bit, the boy trembled at what he saw. Astride the animal was a horseman dressed completely in black, with a falcon perched on his left shoulder. And basically it turns out that this was the alchemist. And then at page 107, if the warriors come here and your head is still on your shoulders, the alchemist said, at sunset, come and find me. And then the boy said, where do you live? And the horse rode away that the alchemist was on. And then later, page 108, the tribal chieftain called the boy and presented him with 50 pieces of gold. He repeated the story about Joseph of Egypt, and asked the boy to become a counselor of the oasis. So this, or let me carry on the last little bit, and then we'll discuss it. I'm here, the boy said. The alchemist dismounted from his horse and signaled that the boy enter the tent with him. Why did you want to see me? The boy asked. Because of the omens, the alchemist answered. The wind told me that you would be coming, and that you would need help. And then page 110. So you're going to instruct me? No, the alchemist said. You already know all you need to know. I am only going to point you in the direction of your treasure. And then page 113. To continue his search for the treasure meant that he had to abandon Fatima. I want to stay at the oasis, the boy answered. I found Fatima, and as far as I'm concerned, she's worth more than the treasure. So, yeah, there's these ebbs and flows of different things that happen, but he has another dream and that turns out to come true, and then he ends up earning all this money back from the chieftains, 50 pieces of gold, and then he also meets the alchemist. But after all of this, he ends up being like, but Fatima, I want to stay for Fatima. Yeah, so again, the ebbs and flows. Any thoughts there, Peter? I've 3 more little snippets of things. I know that we are tight on time.
No, okay. It's just, I mean, that section is also quite interesting to be like, I think it's a little more him than trusting what he sees, I think he could have said nothing, but I think he really wanted, he thought it wise to actually tell everyone else what he had seen, which I mean, in turn, as we've seen, ended up being a positive outcome, and I think it's also quite interesting to see how then his encounter with the alchemist, it was, I think his initial thing was like, the Englishman is the one that really wants something from you, not me, but, it's kind of was like, no, I've been expecting you, and I mean, it just shows how, in life as well, like, we can be so consumed in the noise around us, but not actually pursue what actually we feel in our hearts, But yeah, that was, interesting that now he's then, again, like I said, there's one main path for the story, but it takes different turns, and now again, it's like he's kind of losing sight of his dream because he's met another woman. But it's like the alchemist is also then telling him, like, no, it's written for you to find it. And like, I mean, he goes on to be like, I've been appointed to help you find your treasure. Like, it doesn't matter what else you've heard or whatnot, but this is what I'm here for, and this is why I wanted to meet you. And I mean, I think also in just the whole I think the boy realized in his bravery. I mean, I don't know if you mentioned the whole part of, what was it that you needed to do? Command the sun to do so, the air, something to do with that's where part. Is it? Yeah. I had. Oh, okay, but yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, but yeah, it's just interesting how. No. Now, him going to the alchemist happened before the attack. This is before the attack, actually.
I'm not sure. Maybe you're thinking of different things. But I'm thinking of him becoming the wind and stuff.
Yes, that's what I was talking about. Is that later?
Yeah, no, that's right at the end, yeah.
Okay, cool. We'll get to that, yeah.
But yeah, maybe a last little comment before we read on. But even though I obviously don't relate to the whole omens and things like that, I think there is in a sort of loose way I can relate to it by saying something along the lines of, even though following omens and stuff like that I wouldn't agree with, there is some element of just allowing life to take its course and not sort of being too afraid of the turns that it takes and things like that, and sort of almost in a Christian way of saying it, having faith in the outcomes that are gonna happen. Maktab. Okay, so running through page 122 because we have about 10 minutes left, so sorry for those listening if we seemed rushed at the end. So 122, and I'm going to read a bunch of things again. So the desert will give you an understanding of the world. In fact, anything on the face of the earth will do that. You don't even need to understand the desert. All you have to do is contemplate a simple grain of sand, and you will see all the marvels of creation. Then page 126. So what should I do now? The boy asked. Continue in the direction of the pyramids, said the alchemist, and continue to pay heed to the omens. Your heart is still capable of showing you where your treasure is. Then on 127, on the following day, the first clear sign of danger appeared. 3 armed tribesmen approached, and they asked the boy and the alchemist what they were doing there. "What are these things?" he asked. "That's the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life, the master's work of the alchemists. Whoever swallows the elixir will never be sick again, and the fragment from the stone turns any metal to gold." The Arabs laughed at him, and the alchemist laughed along. They thought his answer was amusing, and they allowed the boy and the alchemist to proceed along with their life belongings. "Are you crazy?" the boy asked the alchemist when they moved on. "What did you do that for?" And then the alchemist says, "To show you one of life's simplest lessons," the alchemist answered. "When you possess a great treasure within you and you try to tell others, they seldom believe you." And then I'm going to jump ahead again to page 132. The sun was setting, and the boy's heart sounded another danger signal. And then page 133. "These are the spies," one of the three men said. So these are three people that the boy was sensing this danger, and now these people come along. "These are the spies," one of them said. "We are just travelers," the alchemist answered. "Who is your friend?" the chief asked. "An alchemist," said the alchemist. "He understands the forces of nature, and he wants to show you his extraordinary powers. He has brought you money to give to your tribe," said the alchemist, before the boy could say a word. And seizing the boy's bag, the alchemist gave the coins to the chief. "What is an alchemist?" he asked finally. "It's a man who understands the nature of the world. If he wanted to, he could destroy this camp with just the force of the wind." The men laughed. "I want to see him do it," the chief said. "He needs 3 days," the alchemist answered. "He is going to transform himself into the wind just to demonstrate his powers." He granted the travelers 3 days. So now the alchemist and the boy have 3 days to figure this out. And the boy is a little bit annoyed with the alchemist because he just gave all of these money to the people.
Yeah.
But then the alchemist says, "Well, what good would it be if you had to die?" The alchemist answered. "Your money saved us for 3 days. It's not often that money saves a person's life." And then a little bit further down. "Don't give in to your fears," said the alchemist in a strangely gentle voice. "If you do, you won't be able to talk to your heart. There's only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve: the fear of failure. I'm not afraid of failing. It's just that I don't know how to turn myself into wind." And then carrying on page 145. Sorry, just trying to get there. There we go. "The boy reached through into the soul of the world and saw that it was a part of the soul of God, and he saw that the soul of God was in his soul, and that he, the boy, could perform miracles." Then on 150 and 146. "The men were terrified because of his sorcery, but there were 2 people who were smiling: the alchemist, because he had found his perfect disciple, and the chief, because that disciple had understood the glory of God." That was the little bit of the mystical part. And then still jumping a bit further ahead, 151. "The boy rode along all through the desert for several hours and listening avidly to what his heart had to say. Where your treasure is, there also will be your heart," the alchemist had told him. And then 154. "I'm not hiding anything," the boy... Oh, okay. So now they've gone through all of this stuff, and they're in this... they've even... the boy's basically turned himself into wind, and all of these like magical sort of things happen, and they eventually escape out of this dangerous situation, which is caused by part of these tribal wars and all of this danger. And then after all of that, now now they have no money, but I think that there was a little bit of money left because they one piece of gold or something like that was left with someone else, just as like a safety thing, and then they managed along their journey to find this or to get back to this piece of gold, and now they have like a tiny bit of gold, but not nearly as much as they used to have. And then they carry on their journey, and then the boy is now gets to, I think he's now at the pyramids, and he's sort of digging for the gold, and then this is where we pick.
Okay, I think just a bit of a correction there.
Go for it.
The god that it gives away is the one that the alchemist makes. So they lose everything, but then after the whole wind situation, they let go. Then they come to a point where the alchemist actually shows him making gold from like random metals. Yeah. So then from that gold, he then takes a piece gives it to he takes a piece for himself, piece for the alchemist, and then another piece to the guy, and then gives him an extra piece to say that the boy will. There's a reason why I'm giving you this. The boy will need it, and then the boy was kind of perplexed because I was like, "But I'm now, on my path to find gold. I doubt I'll need this,
but treasure.
But like you said, then it will make sense why that was important that man was given.
They have another piece of gold.
Yeah.
In my cramming in the last part of the book, then I obviously mixed up those things. But thanks. That makes sense. So now he has this piece of gold, and then on page 154 it says they basically, he gets caught in another difficult one of these situations, and then the boy says, "I'm not hiding anything," the boy answered. But one of them seized the boy and yanked him back out of the hole. Another one who was searching the boy's bags found a piece of gold. "There's gold here," he said. The moon shone in the face of the Arab who had seized him, and in the man's eyes the boy saw death. And then a little bit further down, what good is money if you're going to die? It's not often that money can save someone's life, the alchemist had said. Finally, the boy screamed at the men, "I'm digging for treasure." And though his mouth was bleeding and swollen, he told his attackers that he had twice dreamed of treasure hidden near the pyramids of Egypt. "Leave him alone. He doesn't have anything else. He must have stolen the gold." The boy fell to the sand, nearly unconscious. But before they left, he came back to the boy and said, "You're not going to die. You will live, and you will learn that a man shouldn't be so stupid. 2 years ago, right here on this spot, I had a recurrent dream too. I dreamed that I should travel to the fields of Spain and look for a ruined church where shepherds and their sheep slept. In my dream there was a sycamore growing out of the ruins of sacristy, and I was told that if I dug the roots of the sycamore, I would find the hidden treasure. But I'm not so stupid as to cross an entire desert just because of a recurrent dream." And then they disappeared. The boy stood up shakily and looked once more at the pyramids. They seemed to laugh at him, and he laughed back, his heart bursting with joy, because now he knew where his treasure was. And then basically the boy goes back to the church and he digs, and then he ends up finding this treasure that had been right there the entire time, right by the sycamore tree. And then it ends with these words: It's true, life is really generous to those who pursue their destiny," the boy thought. Then he remembered that he had to get to Tafara, so that he could give 1/10 of his treasure to the gypsy woman that he had promised. The wind began to blow again. It didn't bring with it the smell of desert, nor the threat of Moorish invasion. Instead, it brought the scent of perfume he knew well, and the touch of a kiss that came from far away, slowly, slowly, until it rested on his lips. The boy smiled. It was the first that he had done. "I'm coming, Fatima," he said. Yeah. And that's the end of the dream and the journey and all the things. Peter, any last words before you have to run off?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think another interesting bit in that section is, what the alchemist has said earlier to him, that whenever you tell people the truth, so often they don't believe it, especially if it's like a dream. And I mean, the boy kind of alluded the fact that he was digging for gold, but then the guy was like, nah, there's nothing like that here, and then only to find out that it came back to actually reveal to him where the treasure was. And I mean, it's also interesting to, another thing that I was like, the world or the universe looks out for people. Like, if you notice, there was a section where these were the same guys that tried to, he fell sick at that one. There's a section in the book where they said he fell sick, but then the reason why he fell sick is because there were actually attackers that were waiting for him in front, but actually never got there. And I think somehow, I think it ties in that these were the same guys,
Okay.
So yeah, it's very interesting how, like, I also feel like it's the whole thing of, not that I believe this, but just for the context of the book, it's like, if you do not realize your dream, it will be passed on to someone else. So in this case, it was like the first person to get this dream was this guy, but he was, again, like you read, he said to the boy, I'm not stupid, I didn't follow that at all. But he was
Yeah.
determined to actually follow this dream, and in the end, he actually found the treasure. So.
Yeah. And I liked as well that it sort of ended with the idea that Fatima is still the main
Yeah.
thing that he wanted. He didn't give up his dream and throw it away, but he also the dream didn't consume him. He just sort of took a moment to go and go after the dream, the treasure. But at the end, he knew that he wanted to return to Fatima, and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think it was a really good read, and as long as one can sort of put the mystical stuff aside, if that's not what you believe in, then as long as you put that aside, I think it's a really like valuable book to gain a bunch of sort of interesting life lessons through a wild and twisting story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Cool. Thanks very much, Peter. Until
Thanks,
next
James.
time.
Cool.
Maktub.
Cheers.
Cheers.